Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. We've got quite an adventurer on the show today. He's going to tell us a bunch of cool stories, and his name is Wells Jones. He's an author of A Line in the Sand. Wells, welcome to the show. So happy to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a good day.
As I mentioned to you right before I pushed the record button, I thought we'd just give our listeners just a real quick, and you said that's hard to do. I get it. But we're going to give them a real quick, what's the book about in the 30-second kind of time frame? And then we're going to go back, way back in history, and we're going to work back to the book, and then we're going to dig in a little deeper. So what do you want our listeners to know right off the bat about the book?
Okay, dear listeners, the book, A Line in the Sand, is written by myself, Wells Jones, and Miles Spencer. Back in 2005, we wanted to know more about what's going on in the Middle East. We worked 8 months to get into the Middle East to follow T.E. Lawrence's path from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, following the Arab Revolt, right up to Damascus, just like in the Lawrence of Arabia movie. And then we went into Israel. The book is based on that and finding out what's really going on in the Middle East, maybe something beyond the headlines that were just raging around us in 2005, 2006 during that war.
Very cool, because now anybody that's...
Was that 30 seconds?
That was really good. I didn't time it, but it was enough that everybody that's listening to this is, ooh, that sounds fascinating. And I promise everybody that's listening, we're going to come back and dig into that deeper. But I'm always curious about when somebody does something like that, what the heck was going on in their childhood? What was going on early in life? And how did they get to doing that? Because you're not the typical person that's, sitting on the couch I shouldn't say the typical person, but, the person who's sitting on the couch watching the news or scrolling through their social media. So something happened to get you to where you are. And I remember the first time we spoke, we talked a little bit about some time that you did in Antarctica. And so how far back do we need to go to get a kind of an idea for you, Wells?
Well, I think it has to start with a large military family. My father was a captain in the Army, Korea, a general's aide. I have 2 older sisters that are twins, a younger brother and a sister that are twins, and a brother born on my first birthday. Okay, folks, that's 6 kids. We were all within 6 years of age. My mother has passed on, bless her, fabulous woman. And my father passed on when I was 11, everybody was very young. And we were in Vermont. We'd moved from South Carolina, where I started school, good old South Carolina, and moved to a very rural town in Vermont. My graduating class with 5 towns was 31, very rural.
Where in Vermont were you, Well?
Bethel, Vermont. It's close to the center of the state. It's right off of Interstate 89. And we had just a number of small little towns that people fed that school. During high school, of course, the biggest influence in my life was my mother. There were things that set the stage. One was, by the time I was a sophomore, I said, I want to run away. She said, what are you talking about? I said, I can't deal with this. I want to go out there beyond that. She said, read. You need to read more. You're not reading. I don't want to read. Why would I want to read when I can go out and do something? She said, well, if you cannot handle where you are in the moment, you have no business going forward. Deal with where you are first, always, and then you'll know where to go next. Start with that. So that was something that I learned. And another thing that I learned that was very instrumental was a Churchill quote. And I have to read it because, I could paraphrase it. Churchill, forget who it was, but it was Churchill. You may have feelings about him. To each, there comes in their lifetime a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to them and fitted to their talent. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour. Jason, I have been tapped my whole life on the shoulder to do things I never would have dreamed of doing. I wanted to fly jets in 73, Vietnam just over with. And I thought, gee, go into the Navy, you can get a GI Bill. I mean, this is how much I knew, and then apply for jet school. That's as far as I got. I got into the Navy and I ended up, I did not end up getting into jet school. By the time I was on my way out the door, the commanding officer the sentencing was very clear and quick. Son, you're 6'3". You have lousy eyes. You will not be flying jets. I can put you anywhere in the world if you would re-up. Your record is stellar. You're Antarctic pararescue. You've done great things. You've been awarded. You've been so forth. Where would you like to go? I said, sir, I'm going to leave. And if I can't fly jets, I'll be a smoke jumper in the Pacific Northwest. Anything. At any rate, the time in the Navy was very instrumental because it was the discipline, it was learning capacity, it was learning adaptability that I got from my mom. It was learning to find the joy where you are. Don't comment on it. Participate. Be involved. And it just gave me great skills that I've used ever since. And they've just stacked up. I ended up going to acting school instead of smoke jumping. My best pal, my climbing and skydiving partner on the rescue team. By the way, the pararescue team was a skydiving precision parachuting team that could land. We landed on glaciers and on the polar plateau, and it was established because we had so many mishaps. We called them mishaps when a plane went down, usually because on takeoff, trying to plow through an open field of snow and ice, there would be JATO, which is jet assist takeoff canisters put on the back aft part of the plane to assist lift in the aircraft. Well, they would fly off the bracket.
Rockets or something?
Like rockets. You see it I'm used to see it at air shows. They have a C-1 and on a regular runway, they're ignited and it just basically gives it jet assist to that aircraft. And so that's why we had a parachuting rescue team. Why were we there? We were flying the plane for the National Science Foundation, flying scientists and placing them in all different lat longs around the ice, Antarctica. And so it was an extremely exciting, adventurous deal for 4 years.
I want to dig in a little bit more into how you got there because we left with, okay, you were in Vermont. It's like, you need to learn where you're at, be in the moment, be in the present, a few different ways to say that. But that's what I heard. And then you ended up in the Navy thinking you wanted to be a pilot in the Navy. Did you go straight from Vermont into the Navy? Did you go to school before that?
I did.
Or what did that look like?
No. I was out of high school, I think 9 days. I wanted to get out of Vermont as soon as possible. And this was my avenue. I had no business going to school. Dartmouth was very close. And I know about Dartmouth from other people that went there, friends. And also it was the only cultural avenue that one could get in Vermont or in the area where I lived. It had Hopkins Center, which was, you could listen to some music, theater, and so forth. Actually, the drama director of Dartmouth, Rod Alexander at the time, was our commencement speaker. And I am telling you, it was a great choice for me. But the crowd was kind of perplexed by this very flamboyant tweed guy with an ascot and glasses coming on and off as he's telling these 31 kids to, go live life, travel, experience. And most people hadn't been far,
It's an interesting thing because I lived in Vermont for 9 years. I was in southern Vermont, down around Bennington. Actually went there very close to Bennington. I went there to work for Orvis. Being a Vermont guy, maybe you've heard of Orvis. Yep.
Of course.
But the only reason I went, and I'm not knocking Vermont, it's a beautiful place. And I was in Montana before that. So I went from Montana to Vermont to run the travel business for Orvis. So in my mind, it was like, okay, I'm going to Vermont. because I'm going to be able to go visit all these other places in the world. So it worked out. But I remember thinking, gosh, it's so beautiful. And I know we've got listeners in Vermont, but it's quiet and it's isolated. And if you have a little ADD like I do, and maybe you do, I don't know, I'm not going to speak for you, but it was like, as long as I was traveling, it was fine. But then if I'd go for a few months without taking any trips, it was the same little country lane back to my house every day after work, and the same little market that I would stop into to buy whatever I needed. And I went in the same place for 9 years, 3 or 4 times a week. And every time I walked in there,
amazing.
Who are you? What are you doing here? I didn't go to high school with you.
Exactly.
You know. So to listen to you talk about going to school there and how you're like, man, I want to get out of here. I get it. And now that we've turned off all the Vermont people that are like, I'm not listening, or they're resonating and they're like, yeah, I can. All right. So 9 days, you're like, I'm going to go join the Navy. And I guess the question is,
well, I had signed up before. It was planned. I actually signed up in February. Okay. And I knew, and the war was just over, I knew that was my ticket out. And I wanted to see where I would land. And I was very positive. And it was spectacular. What a choice. 19, 20 years old, stepping off a C-130 as a member of the parachuting rescue team of Antarctica.
Yeah, it's super, super cool.
Had gravitas and responsibility, accountability. It was focus. And fortunately, I just wasn't into big drinking or drugs. And it was mountain climbing, working with the Kiwis that taught us how to do rescue techniques, guys that were from the South Island of New Zealand. The staging base was Christchurch, New Zealand. So we went from Point Magoo to New Zealand. It was.
What did your family think? You've got a bunch of siblings. I don't know if was your mom still around at the time? Your mom was still around at the time when you shipped off to the Navy, right?
Yes, my mother passed on 10 years ago. Yes, absolutely. And
so what did she think?
The fun thing was, siblings they didn't have a say in it. They were involved in their lives. They were involved with their friends and the things that they did. They just knew that I was heading out. And then, when I came back to visit after a year and I had my parachute and things, and I was showing my brothers, well, this is what it looks like. And they're just standing there just like, this is amazing. And they were like, this is amazing. So do you carry a gun? I don't have a gun. I have an ice axe. So what do you do with that? Well, I arrest myself from falling off of sides of glaciers,
Yeah. Hopefully you don't have to use it very often.
No, it was fantastic. And the exposure to the scientists, to their assistants, to multiple cultures, the languages, the French, Russian. We made an annual flight to Vostok, which was the Russian Antarctic base. And it was always exchanging, Wrangler jeans for fur coats. I mean, it was unbelievable. Wrangler jeans was probably the hottest item back then in the early 70s to exchange for another item or a series of things with the Russians. But it was the Kiwis. And of course, the Kiwis are just renowned mountaineers. Edmund Hillary was a New Zealander, Rob Hall, so many. And the guides that I was trained with and became friends with and climbed with in Antarctica, all has Everest and different places have moved on. And we're all within the same age range.
Right. A couple questions on that. One that I just have to ask. One question that I have to ask is when you joined the Navy and you were thinking, okay, I want to go be a fighter pilot in the Navy. Did your recruiter not mention, geez, Wells, you're 6'3", your eyesight's not that great? Or was he just kind of like, oh yeah, sure. Once you get in, you can do anything you want to do.
Well, what I started off, I had to select a rate when I was, a trade, as they say. And I was going to be a yeoman, and I was going to be a yeoman so that I could be a judge advocate assistant. Now, a judge advocate is an attorney, and that's an officer. And I thought I would start at that level because it's intelligent, it's high level. I had no idea that the direction it was going to take. In my mind, when I mentioned fighter pilot, he goes, "Oh, sure." It was in Vermont. Or New Hampshire.
Once you finish your basic training, you can go to flight school. Yeah, I remember.
He said
they got me the same way. They were gonna.
Did they?
Yeah, yeah, go be a ranger and do ranger airborne infantry, and then you can go be a helicopter pilot. It'll be really easy. Yeah, I never
Exactly.
became a helicopter pilot.
Exactly.
But anyway, yeah, it's
Well,
cool.
I had buddies
And,
that they flew UH-1Ns. That's what we flew in Antarctica,
mhm,
twin jets. The guys, everyone's like 26, 27, 28 years old, young JGs, Lieutenant JGs,
mhm,
and they're flying and they're getting their AC, their aircraft commander. And they were mavericks. These guys were hotshots. Even the
mhm.
C-130 guys, there was when I found out about the jet school, it's really after I was in the Navy, is what I realized that's what I want to do.
Okay.
And it came from the C-1 pilots. And I heard, because I was a yeoman, I had access to the officers' records. So I knew a bit about these guys. Of course, it's all confidential, but I
Mhm.
did know their background, where they went to school, how well they did, and so forth. And some had applied to jet school and they didn't get in. And I asked them about it, because I became friends. I was a pretty intense skier at the time.
Mhm.
And when they found, even though I was enlisted, they found out that Jones was a skier. And they're like, huh. And I said, well, yeah, let's go to Mammoth and we'll ski. And they said, all right, we've got to keep it quiet. And then we just all whooped it up big time,
Yeah, that's because that was the other question I was curious about. Two parts, maybe. One is the typical person that ended up on I'm thinking, geez, join the Navy and they say, oh, we're going to send you to Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
Was that like a good thing? It's like, is that something people wanted to go? Or was that like, man, that's like sending me to Siberia? How did most people interpret this opportunity?
The first way I knew about it was when I had just finished A school, which was yeoman training. You go through boot camp and then you go to A school, and it's usually in a different city, different part of the country. I was in San Diego, and the guys that were running the class were handing out orders. People were getting submarined, and I knew I did not want to go submarine. And some people were going to apply for SEAL training. I had considered that, and I said, no, 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 just stay with where you are. Just see where this goes. You can always, and that's what I was told, you can always apply for SEAL training buds. But that was my mindset. And they were going, Davis, Diaz, blah, blah, blah. You're going on the different acronyms for things. I won't get into that, but on this or that ship. And they said, Jones, good. He showed it to the guy next to him, and he just was shaking his head. Put it down. Didn't tell me until the very end. He picked it back up. And I was going, and they picked it up and they said, Jones, you're going to teach. And I said, sir, Christchurch, New Zealand. You're going to fly planes for National Science Foundation. This is a choice deal. And I'm going to tell you, son, and son was used a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you, son, you're going to freeze your butt off in Antarctica. So I don't know about that, but Christchurch, New Zealand is pretty choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was it. And getting there, everybody was pretty much, the feeling was everybody was selected. And I had talked a lot about my hiking and my, outdoor work time and skiing. I was a very proficient skier. I didn't compete, but I was competitive in a way. And so I always said that to people. And I think that had a lot to do with how I got down there. And
Yeah, and they're figured, well, he's from Vermont. He must like the cold. It'll be good. He likes to ski, and isolation, all those things.
And I'll tell you what, you learn who you are when you're in those situations in isolation, And I've found that out doing my hikings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on that.
Well, I have always, go ahead.
Well, I was curious about kind of social life, honestly, is what I'm thinking, because I was in the military as a young guy, been around it a bit. If you took me and sent me off to some island with a bunch of Army guys, it wouldn't be long before I was like, man, I really want to go socialize. I want to be around other people. Being around these same Army guys all the time would be stressful. So did you have opportunities to socialize? Do you look back at it and think it was kind of fun, or how would you describe what that, maybe in Christchurch?
I loved the ice. I was rescue. And so everything I did in the United States or in Christchurch was preparation for my work in Antarctica. I became a survival instructor. I learned, and after the first year, it's like I became the assistant and to the officer, was the survival instructor. And then my third year, I became instructor, running the show and training the crews on how to deal with adverse situation. And that's from weather, whiteouts, how to tear a plane apart and use pieces of it for protection. What's the 1, 2, 3 if something happens? And, it's get out of the wind. There's just, as far as the medical stuff, everybody got a sense of that, how to splint a sprain and breaks and stuff and secure people in order to evac. And I had a pal, Paul Deering, and I were just so totally into it. We were jumping out as high as 16,000 feet above the ground in the United States and landing on the target. And that was the whole thing. We were precision. You start off with a great, big, huge canopy that they used in World War I, I'm sure. So you can't steer it. And worked into high performance canopy. And so that was the excitement and the joy of the lessons learned with my Kiwi friends, the mountaineers, real mountaineers, guys, that's their life. That's what they got paid for. And one guy teamed up they were talking about a kid that was back home in New Zealand. They'd say, what's that kid's name? That tall, lanky guy. They said, Rob. He goes, yeah, the kid's like 15 years old. What's his last name? Hall. Well, Rob Hall became a renowned climber. He and the guy that I was friends with and talking with, Gary, started their own company. Gary wouldn't have, if you were to tell Gary then that, hey, Gary, 5 years from now, you're actually going to be paid to get people to the top of Everest. And he would say, no way. I would never do that. I would never. I'm pure. I'm this, I'm that. They had something that was, and both Gary and of course, Rob Hall, Into Thin Air covers it's Rob Hall. Okay. That's the movie in the book that covers his expedition along with several others, but he was the main hero and he stayed with a guy that couldn't move and he wasn't going to, and he just froze, So wonderful lessons from there. And my mother said, Paul's not going to get out for another 6 months. We're thinking of being smoke jumpers. I found out that we're not even going to be able to jump out of a helicopter until after 2 years on the ground doing groundwork. And I said, I just don't want to do that. And she said, you should go into acting and don't ever tell anyone that your mother said that to you. But it's true. She said, because those few shows you did, the community theater in another town, she said, just your presence on stage, you've got it. And it's in your background through your grandmother, your dad's side of the family, stage work. And so I did. I was in Santa Barbara. I studied, did very well. And we were doing shows again with other people that were just at the top of their game with ACT, American Conservatory Theater actors, were just as good as anything out of the Royal Shakespeare Company. I mean, they were just brilliant. They're out of San Francisco and they came down for repertory summer in Santa Barbara. And so I was lit and it allowed me to.
I'm curious. Well, it's because I was involved in theater, military. There's quite a few things here that are kind of interesting.
Really?
Not at the level you were, probably in either one. But what I'm curious about is you show up for acting class. I'm just going to say acting class, and you can correct me if we should expand on that. But you show up for acting class and they're like, who are you? Where'd you come from? Oh, well, I spent the last several years down in Antarctica skydiving and parachuting and climbing mountains and all this stuff. And I'm envisioning that you probably weren't the typical person showing up in acting classes in California. Is that fair to say, or am I wrong?
Well, no one knew. I kept my mouth shut.
All right.
Really, I never, until I started doing these podcasts, I did get an acting job because of it. And I said, 7th person to skydive the South Pole. That's in the world. And that happened in 1977. And it was Lee Strasberg, John Strasberg's son. Lee had just passed on. I had moved from Santa Barbara doing very well and getting lead roles and getting wonderful recognition in the press and attention from managers in LA, known managers. And I went down, they told me what I had to do. I came home and I wrote him a note. Thank you, no thank you. The note going into that meeting with these managers was, you got to tell them you want to be a star. They're not going to deal with you unless you're willing to sacrifice whatever they want you to do. And I wasn't. And what I really wanted to know was my craft. I didn't want to jump into Los Angeles without really knowing what I'm doing. And that goes back to my mom. Stick where you are until it's time to go. And you'll be tapped. You'll know. And so I applied for the American Academy. I did an audition on the West Coast and I was accepted. And I got in and went through their 2-year program and then was invited back for their 3rd-year program. In the 2-year program, there were, let's see, out of the 3 awards, the big awards they give, male and female, I got 2 at the American Academy. And we were on this at the Winter Garden Theater on Broadway where Othello was being done with Christopher Plummer and other people. And it was hard for me, actually. The school was hard because they said no tricks and they just whittled me down. This one acting coach, Miss Powell, fabulous. She would sit there, and those are the days where people could actually smoke in the rooms. And she had a little ashtray and she smoked and she'd sit there and watch the scene. She goes, "How did you feel?" I said, "Great." She said, "No, I didn't buy it. Not for a moment. You're thinking too much. You're thinking too much. You're not living. You're not in the moment. You're not blah, blah, blah." So the acting gave me these things like being in the moment, being calm, being accessible, listen, being aware.
Isn't that interesting? The connection to your same thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was the observation. It's like the same with, the first time I heard situational awareness, scan where you are, know where you are, risk assessment. That happened way back in the service. That's come with me all the way through all these things because I couldn't make a living acting. So I became a producer director. And the first show I was tapped on the shoulder to do, I would never have applied for the job. It's not something that was in my mind. I know I needed to make more money to feed my family, but the other people saw something in me that they felt, "You're the one. No, I want you." And I just learned not to stand there and go, "No, thank you. I've never done that before. I've never been a director at the Kennedy Center Opera House for a show with James Earl Jones as the host and blah, 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 blah. 300 inner city school kids that are going to do song and dance to entertain. And there's going to be, Mrs. Bush is going to be there and blah, 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 blah.
Well, how did it go?
And it was stellar. It really was. And it was the first round the actual first one was at Lincoln Center in Avery Fisher Hall. And that was a jazz show. Charles Kuralt was our host. Do you remember Charles Kuralt?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that guy? Charlie, Uncle Charlie was our host. And we had the jazz musicians from Tito Puente to Lionel Hampton, people that were around. I mean, it was loaded. It was like seeing Newport jazz on one stage, the hot shots in one show. And so it was fabulous. And the production company was with my then wife. We were actually together for 29 years. And part of our deal along with children and family and moving and many amazing things accomplished was having this production company. But as far as that went, I was the lead and the lead producer and director of the events. And there have been well over 100 of them all over. Did a tribute to doesn't matter. I won't say names because it gets political, but people where the expectation is very high and the people involved. I had Colin Powell on stage lip syncing How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You in a leather motorcycle jacket with a t-shirt, jeans, and loafers. And he'd turn around in the back, it said Heartthrob on his jacket. It was fabulous. And there were 4 other couples on stage. The women were dressed in early rock and roll outfits, and the men were in these Fonzarelli type, outfits, leather jackets, and they say Heartthrobs. And the names were, like Steve Case from AOL, and people. And it was to raise money for a foundation. And so the ideas, the execution, the responsibility, accountability fell in my court. Not all the ideas, because they grew through the group.
Right. We kind of touched on a few things that kind of tie the military, about kind of being present and, scanning your surroundings and all this stuff. But other than that, What do you think it was from your time in the military that contributed to your success, these types of projects? Did you feel like there were some things that really, I
Yeah,
suspect
I
there were.
think that consciousness, being conscious, being present, listening, knowing how to listen, knowing how to, that started the discipline, organization, being organized in order to do a production where you have designers and you're the sign off on it, on this is good, this is not, we need more, we need less, we don't have the budget, blah blah blah. So it was organization probably, and the discipline, and a knowing that it's going to work out. It's a live animal, and it's not just taming it, it's building, it's creating it. And that takes a mastermind group to do that. Now, mastermind, we can look back to certain people, Stephen Covey or someone that talks some leadership group, but it's true that I learned very quickly that I didn't have to know the details of a lighting designer. I had to know a lot, and I had to learn that and to know the sequence of events that get something done, starting with the end result. Okay, this is the date, backing it up to today and what needs to be done between now and next week now, and getting a handle on that. So it was organization.
Yeah.
And I heard, just real quick, in acting, I've heard so much about, some people talking about shows they were in New York. I did a lot of off-Broadway, and I did it with Geraldine Page and F. Murray Abraham, and just one for Salieri. So I was always tapped at these levels. It was just wonderful. I wasn't asking for it. It was offered. And so it goes back to the Churchill quote, being ready, which goes back to the first time I heard, be prepared to model of the Boy Scouts.
Right.
But I wasn't a Boy Scout, being prepared.
There's so many things coming up, and part of it is, as a young man, just leaving Vermont, going on this big adventure and doing these things that not everybody does. I mean, I remember just even in my life, sometimes I'm like, well, I used to sleep in a hole in the ground, with my M16, or I used to jump out of airplanes or whatever. So when I run into something that seems like a little bit of a challenge, it's like, you kind of like, oh, now wait a minute, this isn't so bad. I mean, I did not miss my time in the Army myself. I'm like, okay, I got that out of my system. Mm-hmm. But I definitely, that sense of confidence, I was 19, 20 years old, calling in a full of helicopters into my LZ and I'm in charge, or you were doing some of the same stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, so sometimes those other things just seem so much easier I don't know how to do it, but I have faith in my ability to figure it out is my kind of mantra. And it sounds like you've had kind of a similar.
I would say so, Jason. It's even to this day, my intention going up the mountain for the sunrise, and I go out early. I'm on the trail at 5:30, and I get up before the sunrise, just right when it's just ready to come up on the top of the mountain. And so it's not a heck of a long hike, an hour, but it's fast. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, I want to go as fast as I can, but I don't want to step on the dirt. I want to step on rocks and boulders. And I'm going to climb. I mean, it's literally up and down. It's like, I don't know, Stairmaster, whatever. I don't do Stairmaster, but it's that kind of a thing, an exercise. Mm-hmm. And so it's about capacity. And there's this thing that said, yeah, well, you didn't get a lot of sleep, or you didn't, yesterday was kind of a big day. Why don't you just it's like learning to say, to dismiss those thoughts and finding out about capacity and learning to treat the body and mind rigorously. And I had Mike Love from the Beach Boys, Colin Powell, Sam Donaldson. Who else was in the room? Many people. And these guys, and there's just men. We were pulled off to the side of the Marriott Wardman Park, big ballroom. It's 300 feet long and 100 feet wide. We pulled over to one side so I could tell these guys what they had to do. And when you stop, I stopped, and I'm looking at James Earl Jones, Colin Powell, Steve Case, Sam Donaldson, and saying, and it's like this, okay, guys, this is what's going on. And then, of course, he said, so let me get this straight. And it's Colin Powell. You want da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Yes, sir. Can we do that, guys? Blow it off, And it was about what they were going to do that evening to entertain 650 people were there to write big checks for a foundation that Alma Powell was the had been the chairman of the board. So
cool.
it's
And
learning.
Not everybody can do that. It's a knack to stand in front of a group of people like that.
But you realize that people, and I know enough working at that level, that everyone is vulnerable. Everyone has their thing, their concerns, and it's to learn to feed them what they need, put them in a position to excel. Even Colin Powell. And I said to him, his nickname was Collie. And I said, what you need this comb. And he's going, oh. So I can, you're saying how sweet. First you get up there and it's Marvin Gaye. You just do a little comb back, put it in your thing. And he said, got it. Brought the house down. That's like, cool. It's about them. It's not about me. People say, why aren't you on social media? I've never been on social media. I've never been in a position where I highlight myself until now. I mean, I have a LinkedIn page and I do have a Facebook, but it's not, it's not about, I always feel it's service. I've been serving. It's been adventure with purpose. That's what the book's about.
Yeah,
that's what that you see. And that's what Kayak for a Cause was about. My meeting Miles, it's like it says in the book, these two guys met and they were lifelong friends the day they met. It was just like a calm, like, you're cool. Yeah, I think you're cool too. It was just, and it's been 30 some odd years. Yeah.
Well, let's get into that, because I promised at the beginning that we would come back around and really dig into the book. Okay. And I'd like to start with, where did the idea come about? I mean, the relationship between you and Miles, how did that inspire you guys to go do this?
Well, first, Miles and I worked on a television show called Money Hunt. He called on me because I was an working actor, and we met in church, like it says in the book. And he had a concept to do a television show that we were, he worked it out with his co-host partner at a cable access in Norwalk. Cable access was free, but it was to bring entrepreneurs that had a business plan. They were looking for funding, and these two guys would rate whether they deserved the funding or not, or what they needed to do. So it was in the mid-90s. But it blew open into a PBS series that ran for 3 years, and we were right on the cusp of 6 models in 6 different countries modeling this. It's pre-Shark Tank, and it's a lot better. I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing, amazing show. Money Hunt. So we started there. I went to DC. I ran the foundation. They didn't just like the production work that I did. They wanted me to run the foundation as a chief operating officer. And so I took that on. So they got 2 for 1. I was a chief operating officer, and I did the producing and directing of the events, the big events. But it was a good fit. Moved, bought a house in Chevy Chase, was there 4 years and got out of there as soon as I could. Came back up through, not in Vermont, but into upstate New York, Connecticut, saw Miles. And this is 2005, T.E. Lawrence. I said, yes, I do. No way. I said, yeah, I've read 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Have you? Yeah. He said, you could play him. I said, I was going to. I wanted to do a one-man show when I was back in my acting days. And I found out it was 5'5.5", and no way. But I think the guy is amazing. He's an icon. I mean, I loved his stories. The movie, lit my fire, Lawrence of Arabia. And then I found out more, and I was thinking, oh, Peter O'Toole, he's tall, he's blonde, blue. I'm tall, blonde, blue. I could do Lawrence. And then I found out that being 5'5.5" for him was integral to his whole nature. It was his drive came out of that, improving his value, his worth, and his strength, his stamina. And we ended up being introduced to a Broadway producer. We're still with her. It's almost 20 years. We've had 4 different writers that we've commissioned, known people, British, 3 known. And now we have a woman that's an American, and she has reconceptualized the play. The play is to bring Lawrence back to life, Gertrude Bell and Faisal, to give an inkling on how we got into this Middle East. Miles and I, after Nell bought into it quickly, Nell is the executive producer, the Broadway producer. She did Nicholas Nickleby, Mornings at 7, Amadeus, Elephant Man, and something else. And one she's major West End Broadway player still. And so we said, leaving her office a few days later, we've got to go there. It's 2005. We trained for 8 months and to follow T.E. Lawrence's path from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, up through Aqaba, the fort. We're at that fort, still there. There was one that was a turning point in the war, up through Jordan, taking side trips to Petra, to Karash, to beautiful castles, medieval castles, all the way up to Damascus, went further to Homs, and then into Israel. That was our journey. It was a month long, 39 checkpoints, tremendous training before going. We thought about writing a book, but we were working on a play, and we were responding to all the different versions of the play, as well as our normal job, producing and doing other things. October 7th, 2023, the horror of it all, of hatred, anger that has become hatred that's beyond belief. And it stems from the foundation coming from those days, early days with Lawrence, when he was with the Arabs fighting the Arab revolt. There were promises made that simply weren't kept, secret agreements that were kept, Sykes-Picot, the Balfour Declaration allowing a Jewish homeland in an Arab area. Right or wrong, everybody's doing what they think is right. I'm not judging it. We went to see for ourselves what it looked like. Lawrence loved the region, loved the people. They loved him. He understood the tribes. He didn't try to change them. He saw who they were as human beings, as well as people in Israel. The Arabs there. There were very few Jewish people there until the Balfour Declaration, when it allowed the establishment of a Jewish homeland, which is beautiful. And so after October 7th, 2023, we said we have to get the book out because what we viewed, and yes, we're observers, but what we saw was very different than the headline that were happening in 2005. We went in 2006. We wrote the book last March, not this last, 1 year ago, March, and we decided to make it historical, nonfiction, and that was a choice instead of historical fiction, not doing nonfiction because we just didn't want to bore people. We wanted to entertain people, to pull them in to hear the history. So there's a time travel device, a dagger, and the question is, could this have been Lawrence's dagger? But anyway, suspension of disbelief, drama. A time travel device for the lead characters, Magnus, Miles, and Finn, Wells, to eavesdrop on Lawrence in very specific moments of history. So there was a cryptext, you dial it back to a certain thing when they were, Magnus and Finn are in certain areas of the Middle East. It's like, hey, let's go back in time and see what experience this and see what's going on. And so it gives an accurate picture of the history, and the fiction is to entertain as it informs. The book has two young proteges that met, one's an Arab, one's a Jew, and they met at a camp called Seeds of Hope, but it's based on a real camp called Seeds of Peace. Seeds of Peace received a quarter of our funding that we raised to go to the Middle East back in 2005 and 6. We started raising money, and we identified Seeds of Peace, and they're an organization that's still around since 1993, Arab and Palestinian and Israeli high school thought leaders together in Maine for the summer on a lake to deal with conflict resolution and a new way of resolving issues. And
now,
we met with...
is that still, you said it's still continuing?
Yes, it should be in the show notes. It should be in the show notes, Seeds of Peace. In the book, we call it Seeds of Hope. It's Abdu and Jeremy. Jeremy is a Jewish kid, and he's in the IDF. And Abdu is, has been at the Sorbonne, a student, and he's very international, but he is of Arab descent, Muslim. And there's another character from the camp, but these fellows look out for each other. But at the same time, Jeremy has to go fight. And who is he fighting? We met with the woman that is the wife of the man that started the organization. John Wallach had passed on, and we met with Janet in 2000 and told her our plan, that we wanted the money we were raising to do this trek following T.E. Lawrence. She just lit up. She said, "This is amazing." And you're going now. There's a war going on. We know. Are you ready to do this? Yes, we're training. We've got a risk assessment and a special SAS major that is helping us get through this, what to look for, blah, 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 blah. And technology, we had the latest technology to protect us. And we had a boatload of insurance for kidnap and ransom. And we went through 39 checkpoints. And people say, well, after you go through a few, you're probably... Go ahead.
Did you have a particular experience that you thought you weren't going to make it back and all this, or were you able to get through it all because of obviously you got through it because we're having this conversation, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. I think that as an observer, there were several things that came up. Just to finish off with Janet, she set us up in Jeddah, in Amman, and in Damascus, and in Jerusalem to meet with Seeds of Peace former campers.
Oh, cool.
So it was totally brilliant. We were like meeting with an Israeli guy that had been through the IDF, and it was trying, he didn't really want to meet with us, but he was just very closed mouthed. He said, look, he said it was tough. After doing the camp in the summer, I loved it. I made friends. I come home. I have my service. I did 2 years in the IDF. And I just said, I said, were there moments? He said, yes, without even saying. I said, how do you feel about your Seeds of Peace opponents? He said, I would do anything for them. And I have, to protect them. I know where people live. And there were times when I was able to give them a heads up. That we used that in the book as well, that they had a code between themselves, and they did that. There was a great love of country, religion, family, but total perplexity with these young guys. Like, what do we do? We're exposed to this and we have to do this, but that's not what we think.
Yeah, that's a tough, and the thing that just came up, and though it's maybe a dream, but geez, if everybody went to a camp like that, boy, and everybody was protecting the other side, that would really change the world, wouldn't it?
Well, you would think, but one of the things that came out of the people that went, I said, as a parent, I said, what did your mom or your dad think about you going to the camp? Oh, they didn't like it. Really? They said, what are you doing this for? And then someone else would say, go, learn, come back and tell us what you learned. So it was both ways.
Yeah, I could see that, because if I was, a child and growing up in the middle of a conflict and I'm 18 and I say I went to this camp to hang out with a bunch of our so-called enemies, that'd be like me saying I was going to go to an insurgent camp and to do these things.
Yeah.
And I could see where society, you just signed up for the Taliban or whatever. No, I'm right. I get that. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. And also, this story came up twice. And it was actually with women, young ladies, that said that they were at camp, and I don't know which side it was, that they just got furious. They said, my parents didn't want me to go. They were very concerned. And we actually had fights about it. But I said, I will never talk like you talk about these people. And I'm to show my support for us coming together. But I will never, I am not you, Mom. I'm just not you. And I'm not you, Dad. Well, they get to camp. There's a conflict. And the first thing that comes out of their mouth in retaliation is the same words they heard at home. And they were admitting it to us sitting there having tea, in the hotel. And just, they said, it was crazy. I couldn't believe that I was saying it. And then everybody's crying. And I just ran out of the room and I just didn't know what to do. And then this person that I was yelling at, I'm underneath a tree and I hear a flute. Someone's playing the flute. It's on a lake, they're under a tree, it's summer camp. And she opens her eyes and it's the same girl that she was screaming at an hour before. The girl came out to play the flute next to her as a peace offering. It's just kids.
What comes up for me when I'm listening to all this, because it all makes sense, because I think we tend to oversimplify things. Can't we all just get along? But if you look at you've had a family. I was married. I've been in relationships. So what comes up for me is like, okay, you can fall in love with someone. They can be the most important person in your life, whether it's your children, your partner. And when we get upset, how quickly we go back to our childhood upbringing and how quickly we behave like our father did when he was upset. Mm. Or we say the things that our mother said to us, to our own children, those same things exactly what you just said. I would never talk to my child the way you talk to me. And then, wait until that Thursday morning when your kid's like, nah, I don't feel like going to school today. And you're late to a meeting and you're screaming at them like, get the F out of bed, you little pea, da, 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 da. So it's not that hard to imagine why we would have situations like you just described. It's the same situation, isn't it?
It is. It is. Going back to the sense of danger or sense of concern of we had, Miles and I both took a 35-liter backpack, an Osprey, backpack. We had a Tough book that was new. This is 2006, a brand new Panasonic Tough book, so it can handle the desert. We had in 2005, late 2005, they cleared 406 megahertz frequency for civilians. So there was a personal locator beacon that we had the first. That was out. This is a personal locator beacon. There's a band that flies out. You have to triangulate 3 spots where you press, and it's set to signal satellites overhead and then relay to a place in the United States where there's information on miles and wells and exactly what to do. And the only time that would get tripped is if we're in mortal danger. So we had that. We had a BGAN satellite, broadband global access network, that perplexed people, but especially at Israeli immigration, because it's kind of a cream color. It looks like a laptop, but it's thick, maybe 2 inches thick. And you open it up and there's nothing inside. And that's what people got alarmed. It could be a bomb. And I said, it's a BGAN, broadband global access. It's satellite, it connects. So we have phone, solar panel, change of clothes, a sleeping bag that went into a little ball, an ultralight sleeping bag. And we were prepared. And we had training from a man that was a former SAS Irish Guard major. He had, that year in 2005, had been appointed. You can look this guy up. Appointed Jamie Lothar Pinkerton. He had been appointed by the Queen of England, private secretary to Prince Harry and Prince William as their security guide. Oh, okay. He was a partner at Ackerman International Risk Management Insurance Company, security group. I don't know what they are today, but he trained us. And before us, he had trained Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman for their long way around motorcycle trip. So when we actually made contact with him, because I was looking at Blackwater, Triple Canopy, Centurion, the main groups to see if we could get a course through them, but we were led to Jamie, and it was perfect because you broke it down.
Right. And as far as help us in visual, let's kind of visualize what the rotation process looked like on camels at some point. I haven't read the book, so help me out. And I'm not sure the book could probably give me kind of some idea, but again, you mentioned it was fiction. So you guys doing a lot of walking? Were you? Mm-hmm. What did this look like?
Combination. That was the next thing. And that was from Jamie, like, how are you getting around? Just like you're asking. And we found to get a travel company. Hey, a travel company. We're finally talking about travel companies.
Wow, we made it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Peace out. I said the magic
I appreciate
word.
you getting back to this. We talked a lot about theater. Just kidding. Which was fascinating. And it all ties together. But anyway, you were looking for a travel company?
Well, 2005, we wanted to go to a war zone. Not a war zone, but we wanted to go to Saudi Arabia. It's like, one's going to Saudi Arabia. There are 19 terrorists, 3/4 of them from Saudi Arabia. What are you doing? So again, through connections, we were connected with R. Caruso Company. Do you know that name, R. Caruso?
I've heard that name. Yeah, absolutely.
We found out that we were told, last year they put the Chicago Symphony at Machu Picchu. What? They did? Okay, that's interesting. Well, they ended up talking, I believe his name was Bob, the owner at the time. He's no longer there. And it is I don't know how it's morphed. I think they've morphed into something else. But we gave him an idea of what we're looking for, what we wanted to do. We're following T.E. Lawrence's path during the Arab Revolt. And if you're interested in this, we need you to look at 7 pillars of wisdom. That's part of this package. We won't go with anyone that isn't familiar with Lawrence and the places that we want to go along the Hijaz, along the Red Sea, up through the peninsula and get into Aqaba and hit key places. And we don't want fancy travel. We are not going to register with the embassy. We're going under the wire. So we want drivers in their beat up old car to take us from one city to another. We'll show you which ones we want, the route we want to do, and where we need drivers, we're going to hike or we're going to do camels. No driver can know another driver. And that was Jamie said, make sure that the driver you have, you get out, they turn around and leave. That's the deal. And that the next driver is not where he dropped you off. It's someplace else and no one knows excepting you. So he said one of the things
no one person knows where.
exactly. No one knows where we're going other than our Caruso, and they set it up. And then one of the things Jamie said is that just know you are always being watched, period. Be aware, which means that where you walk, when you come out of a building, you go a different direction each time. And you go into a building, sleep, get out of there, and you're gone. Always, if you're sleeping in a hotel, first floor in the back. Saudi, if they grab you, within the borders. He said, no, I'm not saying the government, but in Saudi, if you are kidnapped, you're gone. In Jordan, Jordan's very westernized. Less than 2 weeks before we were going to go, one of the hotels we were going to stay in, the hotel we were going to stay in Amman, was bombed 10 days before we got on the plane to go there, to land there. And that was the first time. Are we going to stay in this hotel? It was like, absolutely. We're there to experience what the people on the street experience. What about the crossing into Israel? Well, just remember, when you get to Israel, have a separate sheet of paper for their immigration stamp. Do not let them put it in your passport because you want to be able to get back into Saudi and different places. And how are you going to cross? The best way, Jamie broke it down, the best way is to fly in, all of them. And we didn't. We took cars, got out, walked across all borders and took pictures. And there were plenty of signs to say no pictures allowed, but we figured out how to get pictures. And we made it. Going across the King Hussein Allenby Bridge to go into Israel. I mean, of all places, go to Jerusalem, Damascus and Jerusalem. I'm just like, I can't wait. And by the time we did, we decided to take a bus. And Jamie was first. He said, buses get blown up. And they get blown up right there. Well, let's hope we're not on one that gets blown up. We're going across on a bus. We did. We're packed like sardines. It's in the book. That crossing, what we experienced is in the book. That's it. And when we talk about aggressiveness, it's not personal. It's because everyone's on high alert. The people coming in could be innocent, but they're not looked at as innocent. Anyone beneath all those layers of clothing can have a vest. I mean, there's just so many different ways to create havoc. And so you have very aggressive immigration officers that command you, stand here, don't move, no messing around. There's no, hey, how's your day going, man? There usually isn't at immigration.
Yeah, I get that.
But it's still, and 39 checkpoints. And the checkpoints, one was most impressive in Jordan, right at the Dead Sea. We wanted to go to the Dead Sea. It was Easter 2006, Easter Day, Sunday for us. We went to the Dead Sea, and Mahmoud was our driver. He came from Seeds of Peace, and we just knew that he didn't talk much. He was a very stocky man, very strong, and just quiet. We pulled up to a checkpoint and handed over our blue passport. This is United States of America. And I'm telling you, it always would say, you're welcome. We didn't have issues. We had issues when we were in country going through checkpoints when no one could speak English. And they're holding a rifle and they're half dressed and they're in uniform, but they just, and it's like on a parachute table, undoing your bag and they, with the nozzle of the rifle, not an assault rifle, the rifle, it could be a 22. It was, and just moving the things around. It's like the BGAN, always. They open it up.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I'm curious, were you still married at this time when you did this trip?
Yes.
Okay. I think we need to touch on what did your family, maybe your kids, what was that like? Did you even tell them you were going? I mean, how did
I
that
did,
happen?
and that was the problem. The problem was, and the retort.
You were married when you went, but you weren't when you came back. I got it.
No. We're not. No. Living in Golden, Colorado, Miles's wife and my wife had a little chat. Do it. The will. And then it came to, Karen, ask you? No. Did he ask you? No.
Uh-huh.
And I said to that, knew I was working on this for 8 months, and it really was kind of a weak position. But what Beth did is that my wife, had a map of the area. And then each day, because we had the BGAN and a pack light solar panels could charge everything up, we were sending dispatches every day of experience from Miles's viewpoint, his going out and mine going out. And so they were able to see those pieces of information, and our funders, the people that supported us, were getting this information live from the desert. It was great. It was cool. And so That was good. And so the kids, everybody was following our path.
Well, so were you completely honest with these dispatches and these updates, knowing that your wives and your kids and your supporters were going to read these dispatches? Did you ever find yourself, maybe we don't need to describe the guy going through our bag with the rifle and yelling at us or any of those, or that we're going to take this bus and it's, just the words, just the things you're saying in this conversation?
Well, that wasn't in a dispatch.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, we did not hold back that the discussion was on people. It wasn't on danger. We didn't even talk about, we absorbed all the checkpoints and all of that. What we were talking about was the culture and the people, someone that we met, or the history in the area, or just a note on where we were. It covered a lot of different things. Food. It was like when I went to the Mount of Sacrifice in Petra, climbing up and getting to the top. There's a wonderful story on, hearing a baby cry. And it's like, I couldn't see anyone. And then coming around and seeing a fully covered in abaya and black, two women and holding two babies. And they had a little cloth that had little silver trinkets on it to sell to people that came up to the top of this altar of sacrifice, And it was just, or swimming at the Royal Marine Dive Club, going scuba diving and watching a woman that came out of the water looking like, who was it in 007 that walked out of the water with a knife and a bikini on, Halle Berry or someone. I mean, just absolutely stunning shape and tanned. And then two women in fuchsia, completely covered, just a teeny little bit on their eyes, opening in their eyes, completely covered, that had little fishy, like children, a swimming ring around them, a floaty.
Yeah,
that had little fishes on
I'm
it.
Picturing that, yeah.
And watching these two cultures, they went by each other. They could almost brush shoulders, and one's half naked, and the others, they even had little booties on, and they jumped into the pool and this woman just came out, she had a knife and
wow,
things like that. The culture and the differences.
Would you have been supportive, knowing what you know now, if maybe, let's just hypothetically, let's say a year after you went, situation's still kind of the same, and one of your children up to you and says, "Dad, what would you have?"
No one would say that, even the people that we knew. When we kept it totally quiet. And when we announced it, it was at each year before Kayak for a Cause. It was an organization that on the last Saturday in July, kayakers formed a pod of 10 kayaks and they raised money. And we had worked up to 313 kayaks and pods. So there was 30 pods plus of kayakers. And we would have a party on the beach. We'd kayak across Long Island Sound, just under 13 miles, transport boats back and have a party. And then the money that was raised, we would have a band, pay for food. And the bands would be like Dickie Betts and the Great Southern, from the Almond Brothers, or the Neville Brothers. I would bring these people in, and then we'd give away checks to 5 charities. We were writing $50,000 checks to 5 charities raised by these kayakers. And we just spent all the money that was raised between the party and giving it all to charity. Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask that. I was trying to connect in my head, honestly, the Kayaks for a Cause.
I'm sorry.
To the book, and I got lost a little.
It has to do with announcing that we were going to the Middle East, because Miles, that was his brainchild, Kayak for a Cause, with another guy. And then I was brought in at a later point. And then at this annual kind of pre-event party that happens, to get people inspired to raise money, we announced that we were going to the Middle East, and the room just went quiet. And then people started moving. They were like, holy cow. Because back then, in 2006, there was war. It was, just a few, not too far away from the different area. And so I wouldn't say that I support my kids. I have a son that's an LA County fireman. He's stationed in Malibu. He was on the fires that were there. It was nuts. He said 36 hours straight of just insanity of the fire. but they just wouldn't, they don't have that gene in them other than Casey to do something like that. My two daughters and my two boys, the oldest boy does have that. He appreciates what I do. They all appreciate it, but they wouldn't put themselves, they're not trained for anything.
Yeah, well, most people just don't even have the desire to do that. I mean, I'm pretty adventurous. Most people don't have the desire necessary to go do something like that. Maybe they aspire, like, man, oh, that'd be cool, but that's another thing. So, well, this is fascinating conversation, and I know we've been chatting for quite a while. We've discussed quite a few different things. Just curious, like, what should I have asked you? What should I be asking you to make sure that our listeners really kind of they're not going to get a complete picture in this one episode, but what do we need to cover before we wrap up so we don't?
I don't think anything's hanging. It's probably an ongoing conversation.
I think so.
It could be an ongoing.
Do a whole series of that.
I do want to say that though I brought up R. Caruso and company at the end, they were spectacular, and they really worked with us to have the experience where we could go with our training and our research knowledge and feel covered. And there were times where we did have to call them and to get clarity on a particular driver or something, a change was happening on site that they handled. And I've never worked with a travel organization. My travel in my family has always been, you want to go to Aspen, you go to Aspen, you fly, or you want to go to Edinburgh and climb around and go to the different islands. We go. But I know people use travel agencies, and they've become very instrumental in offering just wonderful adventures for people that otherwise wouldn't.
I think that's key, that otherwise wouldn't do it. Actually, one of the early episodes, the podcast here, the Made Small podcast, I interviewed Baden, and I'm not going to say his last name because I don't want to get it wrong, with, I think it's B Adventures. He's from Jordan. And he was talking about having American clients, or just a variety of clients around the world, having these amazing cultural experiences and going to these places and sitting down with families in their houses. And it's like, that's pretty cool. And that's not something that most people can coordinate on their own. I mean, hardly anybody. No. So that's what I love about what we have here on the show, the different adventure tourism operators. And we can define the word adventure maze. That could be eating street in Bangkok for a lot of people. I always say it's easier to describe what it's not. It's not the all-inclusive beach resort. It's not the big cruise ship. Anything else I kind of feel like could fit in there. It doesn't have to be Antarctica or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But I appreciate you bringing that up, because your adventures, you're very self-sufficient, but you still found an operator that helped you do something you couldn't have done on your own.
Could not have done it. Absolutely. You nailed it. You could not have done that without R. Caruso and their attention, and Jamie, and having an advisor to where we were going because of where we were going. And being able to meet people on the ground and being invited in to homes, by the men if it's in Saudi, but having meals and unusual food. The book has recipes from what we ate when we were there. And it's just the commonalities are truly universal. And the storytelling, you can listen to someone's opinion, but when you hear their story, it's undeniable, right? Yeah. There's empathy. That's where the empathy, and it's like, my goodness, different color, hair, skin, clothing. It's just embrace it.
I started this podcast. They got it when I was in Malaysia. I got my first trip to Asia. And I went over there, and I'm in Malaysia, and people are dressed so different. You'd see sometimes, not always, but you'd see a woman with their kid climbing all over them, or like you described, the women in the burqa with the swim floaty thing. It's like, oh my gosh, these are just people. They're just like, it's not that different. And you see a couple walking down the street. One, she's in her burqa. He's got his daughter under his arm, and they're just people. They choose to do what they choose to do for whatever reason they choose to do it, but they're still people. And that's why I was like, I want this big world to feel smaller. Big world, it's like, And that's the whole purpose of doing this. So I love that we are leaving it off there. We're going to have a link to the website where they can learn more about you, the book, because it sounds like a fascinating story. Really happy that you joined us today to share quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, I really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Jason, it's really been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
A lot of fun. We'll do it again. We think we've got some more episodes to record. So let's come back and do it.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Thanks, Wells.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
So long. Enjoy.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.